The best summer memories are made outside, and LL Bean has the clothing and gear you need to make these memories. Their effortless styles are created for summer spent outside with family and friends. Like hand-sewn boat shoes, coastal cotton sweaters, rugged polos, and, of course, the iconic boat and tote, which has been made right here in Maine since 1944. LL Bean. Be an outsider. Visit llbean.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You know those friends who support your preference for podcasts over music on road trips? That's the energy State Farm brings to insurance. With over 19,000 local agents, they help you find the coverage that fits your needs, so you can spend less time worrying about insurance and more time enjoying the ride. Download the State Farm app or go online at statefarm.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Content warning. This episode contains explicit sexual references. This is True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time. Week by week, you'll hear the true stories behind the operations that have shaped the world we live in. You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position? I'm Rhiannon Needs, and this is True Spies from SPYSCAPE Studios. Central Moscow, 1986. It's September, and Muscovites are enjoying the last glimmer of warmth before the onset of winter. Even so, the sun is setting, and there's a chill in the air. A brown limousine comes to stop outside an unassuming apartment building. A man in his early 80s emerges into the evening. His face is jowly with age, but the eyes are bright, topped off with two wry commas for eyebrows. They suggest the intelligence you'd expect from this particular gent. An author, screenwriter, and journalist of no small reputation. But in times long past, he turned his wits to other, less public pursuits. Decades later, the echoes of those times have brought him here. His name is Graham Greene, and he's about to call in on a very old friend. The front door opens, and a woman peers out, smiling at Greene. She's heard a lot about him. Her name is Rafina, and she is the fourth and final wife of Kim Philby, former head of anti-communist operations for MI6 and the world's most famous defector.
She greets Greene as he leaves the car and shows him up the stairs to meet Philby, and the two old spies slap each other around the back. They haven't laid eyes on each other for 35 years.
Greene takes in the room. It's small, pokey even. Not the kind of digs in which you'd expect to find a decorated KGB spy in his dotage.
Philby says to Greene, "Don't ask me any questions." And Greene says, "How's your Russian?"
In that special way that only true friendship can muster, the years slip away. Philby and Greene have a lot of catching up to do.
And that's about all we really know about what transpired between them during a very personal and secret meeting between the two men.
We do know that they'd meet again, 3 more times in fact, before Philby's death in 1988. We could think of these visits as a coda to 2 extraordinary lives. Lives that became entwined during one of the 20th century's most volatile moments. Both were marked by treachery at one point or another, and a close reading of their shared history seems to throw up more questions than answers.
I have to say this is the most perplexing relationship I've had to decipher.
Welcome to True Spies, writer and traitor. It's time to meet your guide to this friendship for the ages. A writer who's made betrayal his stock in trade.
My name is Robert Verkaik. I'm an author and historian. I've written a number of books, including the Sunday Times best-selling book, The Traitor of Colditz, and I've also written a book called The Traitor of Arnhem.
Robert's latest book is called The Writer and the Traitor. It's all about the intriguing and complex relationship between two of the 20th century's most fascinating figures.
One of them is Graham Greene, the author. He's obviously the writer, famous for books like Brighton Rock, Our Man in Havana, and The Heart of the Matter. And his friendship, he struck up with Kim Philby during the Second World War. And it's that relationship from then until they meet again in Moscow in the 1980s.
If you're a long-time listener to this podcast, it's possible that you'll already be familiar with some of the background on Greene and Philby. Greene was the protagonist of The Dangerous Edge of Things from 2023. Philby got his own two-parter, Kim Philby Super Spy, in 2024. Those episodes will give you a more exhaustive biography of both men. Here, we'll give you the potted version, up until the two timelines cross over. Harold Kim Philby was born in 1912, a scion of the privately educated British establishment. His father, St John Philby, was an author, explorer, and colonial intelligence officer. Kim became a communist during his time at Cambridge, and after graduating, travelled to Vienna, Austria. There he fell in with the communist underground and married his first wife, Lizzie. When the authorities cracked down on the would-be revolutionaries, he and Lizzie returned to England. He was officially recruited by Soviet intelligence in 1934 and tasked with weaponizing his bourgeois background to infiltrate the British establishment, publicly cutting ties with his leftist past.
And the purpose of it was to get people like him, Oxbridge graduates, principally from Cambridge, into positions of authority, influence and access. He said that he wasn't a double agent. He was only ever loyal to the Soviet Empire. He was a communist by ideology, by training and by profession.
Graham Greene, on the other hand, is harder to pin down. After an unhappy childhood and a young adulthood marked by severe mental health issues, he briefly joined the Communist Society at Oxford University in 1925 in what appeared to be a passing phase. By the early 1930s, he was beginning to build traction as a successful author and journalist, although he certainly wasn't averse to adding a flavour of intrigue to his work as a reporter as the decade wore on.
When he goes to West Africa for the first time, just before the war, he goes around Liberia with his cousin. He offers his services to the British to report on affairs in West Africa, but at the same time he writes to the French ambassador saying that, he's prepared to do the same for them if they wish. So Greene begins life as a more duplicitous character, I think.
Unsurprising, perhaps, espionage ran in Greene's blood. His uncle and namesake, Sir Graham Greene, had helped to establish the Naval Intelligence Division during World War I. As we'll discover, other members of his family were carrying on that legacy too. Both men spent the 1930s as writers. In 1937, Kim Philby arrived in Spain and got a job reporting for the Times of London on the ongoing civil war there between right-wing nationalists and left-wing Republicans. He wrote positive articles about the very uncommunist Francisco Franco, which, naturally, endeared him to the nationalist leader. He was wounded in a Republican shelling, of which he was the only survivor, and was even given a medal by the infamous general. Of course, that was all cover. Philby used his access to Franco to keep the USSR, who were supporting certain factions on the other side, informed. By the time World War II broke out, he was becoming an increasingly valuable asset to the Russians.
And he's with the British Expeditionary Force in France in 1940, reporting on the sort of static front line, I suppose, until the German Blitzkrieg. And he's reporting officially, in the Times about what's going on, but he's also reporting to Moscow about British positions, which you have to understand, the Russians and Germans were allies, and so everything that he was reporting to Moscow we must presume was being sent to the Germans. So he was betraying his countrymen even then.
But after France surrendered in June of 1940, Philby was cut off from that particular stream of intel.
He realises he needs a job in British intelligence if he's going to be of any true value to his Moscow spy masters.
Philby got his wish sooner than he might have expected.
On the way back from France, he meets a woman who has connections with Section D, which D for destruction, which is sort of branch of British intelligence connected to MI6.
Philby made the most of this chance encounter, turning on his soon-to-be legendary charm.
And they have a conversation. She puts a word in for him.
It helped that Philby's old university friend, Guy Burgess, another Soviet asset, was already employed by MI6.
So his recruitment to Section D is pretty straightforward in that sense, because he's got Burgess backing him up.
Now, let's pause for a second. Even with Guy Burgess's thumbs up, surely Philby's vetting process shouldn't have been that straightforward.
He was a known communist at Cambridge, and he'd married a communist agitator.
Then there was the matter of dear old Dad.
His father had started off life as a sort of communist sympathiser, really. There was a file had been opened on him with his connections to Soviet activity in Britain and America. But by 1940, he'd been arrested under the emergency internment laws as a fascist.
Which makes it all the more remarkable that Philby Sr. actually helped to smooth Kim's path into MI6.
His father, St. John Philby, is friendly with the deputy head of MI6, Valentine Vivian, and they have lunch and discuss Philby's being taken on as an MI6 officer, and even his communism is discussed with St. John, and they seem to allay any fears that this is anything more than young Philby's over-exuberance at Cambridge University. But at the time, you have to remember that we were desperate for people like Philby.
Yes. Apart from anything else, MI6 had found itself short-staffed of late. In 1939, the service had been dealt a serious blow in the Netherlands.
During the so-called Venlo incident, when the two MI6 officers based in The Hague, they got themselves kidnapped by the Nazis, and they had with them lists of names of our agents.
And with the Nazis on the march, MI6 didn't have the luxury of time when it came to rebuilding their presence on the continent.
And also have to remember that Russia wasn't the main threat. It had been a threat, but by 1940 it was the Nazis.
Before long, Philby had moved on from Section D, which had been merged into the Special Operations Executive.
By 1941, he's in Section 5, which is counterintelligence MI6, and he's in charge of the Iberian section unfortunately named VD, which is Portugal and Spain and their colonies and West Africa. And that's when he meets Graham Greene for the first time in the summer of 1941.
While charismatic Kim Philby had been climbing the ranks at MI6, Graham Greene had been making his own, less focused way into the world of espionage.
He was actually in Mexico just around the time of the start of the Second World War in 1939, but he knows war was coming and he wants to play his part in the war. He's an established author, he's got a literary following, but his family is steeped in intelligence. His brothers both have intelligence roles in the war. His sister is already an MI6 officer, and he considers joining the infantry at one point. But ultimately, he asks his sister to put a word in for him with MI6.
Again, it came down to who you know, as much as what you know in those days. But Greene's foot in the door wasn't quite as wide as Philby's had been. He had to prove himself, and the process he had to endure would test his limited reserves of bonhomie.
Philby was a much more sort of agreeable, outgoing character, had immense charm. Whereas Greene was perhaps a little bit more sour. He suffered falls less gladly than Philby appeared to.
So his way into MI6 probably wouldn't have been the one he chose.
He spends months attending vetting parties in the West End of London. These were sort of dinner party, cocktail parties where you didn't really know. You're invited to them, but you don't know the real identity of anybody there. So usually it's a Mr. Smith who hosts them. You've no idea who Mr. Smith is. And then you're engaged in, convivial conversations with other spies. And the idea is that, are you the right kind of chap for the job?
He was. As a privately educated Oxford grad, as well as a respected novelist, Greene went down well. And with none more so than Kim Philby.
Philby meets Greene, or assesses Greene at one of these parties, but Greene doesn't know who Philby is, and Philby certainly wouldn't have used his real name. He probably used the name Carter, which he liked to use. Philby describes Greene as an extraordinary candidate. He's out of the run-of-the-mill of the normal recruit.
Certainly, Greene's life experience appealed to the young man from the Iberian section.
He's travelled a lot. That's the thing about Greene. He's been to Liberia, and so they're looking for someone to run a station in Sierra Leone in West Africa.
Greene's face fits, and nobody doubts his intellect. But prospective MI6 officers can't always rely on their wits alone. Sometimes things get physical. Luckily, there's training for that.
He's not a natural soldier, that's for sure, and all the MI6 officers have to do the physical part of the training. I mean, he crashes 3 motorbikes, I think, in the space of 3 weeks. He can't shoulder arms. He's not very good at marching around parade grounds. He's not a good soldier, but he's obviously an intelligent man who would make a very good spy. And his experience in Africa already means that he's a strong candidate for the station in Freetown.
The capital of Sierra Leone, then a British colony in West Africa, isn't what you'd call a plum posting. Not yet, anyway. So it's a tough sell. Kim Philby has his work cut out.
He has to do quite a job on Greene in persuading him that the posting they have in mind for him, Freetown, is not a backwater job. It's a serious job and not something that is meaningless in terms of the outcome of the war. He does a good job on persuading him, but even Philby's not convinced that Freetown is going to play an important role in the war.
You know the feeling. It's been a long day, and the idea of cooking something decent feels ambitious. That's where Factor quietly changes the equation. They handle everything: shopping, prepping, cooking, and they deliver fully prepared meals straight to your door. You just need to spend 2 minutes heating them up, and that's a proper, healthy dinner sorted. And that wonderful convenience doesn't come at the expense of taste. The meals are fresh, never frozen, with over 100 options rotating each week. So you're not stuck rotating between the same 3 dishes. As for cuisines, there's a proper mix too. Mediterranean, Pan-Asian, American classics, and so much more. It's like having a dietitian and a chef quietly sorting dinner in the background, while you get on with the rest of your life. Head to factormeals.com/TrueSpies50off and use code TrueSpies50off to get 50% off and free daily greens per box with new subscription only, while supplies last until the 27th of September 2026. See website for more details.
What happened to her?
Dad? On April 17th, the year's scariest movie arrives.
Let the mummification ritual begin.
Audiences are calling Lee Cronin's The Mummy glorious edge-of-your-seat horror, terrifying from beginning to end.
I really miss being a part of the family.
And an insanely scary ride. Lee Cronin's The Mummy, only in theaters April 17th. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
In early 1942, Greene arrives in Freetown, Sierra Leone. The 3-week journey has been an interesting primer on the grim realities of wartime.
The crew start regaling Greene with stories of how they've all been sunk by submarines in their previous voyages. And then Greene's expected to man the machine guns as well. And he's acclimatised to the idea that war is a dangerous, perilous experience in which the German wolf packs are a real threat.
And another thing about war, things change fast. By 1942, the United States has entered the fray, and Freetown has become far more important than either Greene or Philby might have expected.
It's a big deep water port on the Atlantic, and it's a key convoy hub at this point, and convoys are very important in terms of keeping Britain supplied.
Travelling in convoys made Allied ships harder for Nazi U-boats to take down.
Ships will gather or congregate in Freetown on their onward journeys to Britain, and vice versa from America.
Quite apart from that, Sierra Leone is surrounded by enemy territory, namely the colonies of Vichy France, now under a Nazi puppet government.
You've got French Guinea on its border. So it's full of Vichy spies and German intelligence officers who are recruiting Spanish and Portuguese agents and sending them on the ships that dock at Freetown in the hope of spying on the British and passing on details not just about the convoys but about our military presence in Africa.
Hence the interest of Philby's Iberian section. Spain and Portugal were technically neutral during the war. Their sailors could move more freely than natives of the Axis powers. That sounds like more than enough enemy intrigue for Greene to deal with. But he was also up against certain factions on his own side. Intelligence agencies love nothing more than a little territorial backbiting.
Another sort of threat to MI6, which is MI5, because MI5 and MI6 are competing now.
MI5 are the British Domestic Security Service, the FBI to MI6's CIA.
They're scrambling to take control of Freetown because it's so important. And MI5 want to place their own men there. Because it's a colony, MI5 would normally have precedence, but we're talking about counterintelligence. And MI6 have already established themselves across West Africa. So they also want to protect their own position there. And that's Greene's job, really, is to maintain MI6 representation in Freetown.
Greene had been given a crash course in spycraft before leaving England. But now that he was in Africa, he'd need more specialised training to navigate the nest of spies that was Freetown.
So he's sent off to Lagos under the tutelage of an experienced MI6 officer called Sidney Smith. And he spends 3 months there learning codes, secret inks, convoy protocols, all the sort of things he's going to need in Sierra Leone, where he's going to be the station chief. He spends 3 months doing that, and then he is on his own, really.
Despite being Freetown's chief of station, Greene still reported to the more senior Sidney Smith, 2,500 kilometres away in Lagos, Nigeria. This was not a happy arrangement.
Sidney Smith doesn't know very much about Africa, as it turns out, and they seem to sort of take a dislike to each other on the site. Their relationships quickly deteriorate.
Not being the sort of man to suffer fools gladly, and in his worldview there were an awful lot of them out there, Greene didn't hesitate to kick back against Smith's oversight.
And Smith wants him to do lots of the kind of things that MI5 should do. Conduct interrogations of suspects who are picked up on the ships that arrive in Freetown. And Greene says this is a mucky, dirty business. It's a job for MI5. Not for an MI6 officer who's dealing with counterintelligence report. He shouldn't have to get his hands dirty. Smith insists, and this means that Greene has to cancel some of his other, he considers more important counterintelligence operations on the Vichy-Sierra Leone border.
Things between Greene and Smith deteriorated rapidly, and Smith went as far as to cut all funding to his insubordinate colleague in Freetown. Luckily, Greene had an influential supporter back in London.
And then in the end, Greene is rescued by Kim Philby, who intervenes in the dispute and kind of sides with Greene. And it's Philby who takes direct control of Greene, and Smith is cut out of the arrangement. Greene was so disturbed by the breakdown of relations that he considered resigning himself. But under Philby, he's much happier, and he starts to have really successful time in Sierra Leone.
Even though they were thousands of miles apart, Robert's research suggests that Greene's relationship with Philby was a warm one.
So it suggests to me that they got on pretty well in London. Because Greene feels confident enough to suggest some fairly outlandish espionage operations to Philby, who Philby puts up to his boss, Felix Cowgill.
One of the newly energised Greene's bright ideas was to set up an MI6 sanctioned brothel in Bissau, a part of West Africa which was then home to a Vichy battleship.
They're very keen to find out everything they can about this battleship, because if it goes to water, then the Royal Navy is seriously threatened. So Greene suggests, why don't we set up a brothel in Bissau? And I know that's where all the Vichy sailors will go. And I've even got a French madame who would be willing to run the brothel for us. And what we'll do is we'll mic it up and we'll find out exactly what the Vichy have plans for the battleship.
Now, on this show, we do try not to sully ourselves with the scurrilous private lives of our subjects. But in Greene's case, it really does add some context.
He was so involved with prostitutes in the 1930s and the 40s that he had his own code book for the names of prostitutes that he used mostly in London.
To call Mrs. Greene long-suffering would be something of an understatement, and Graham's isolation in Sierra Leone hadn't improved matters.
Nicholas Elliott, one of Philby's chums, also an MI6 officer, arrives in Freetown in 1943, and he clearly knows Greene, and they exchange pleasantries because Greene meets him at the harbour. But one of Greene's requests is that he provides him with extra rubber johnnies.
That's British for condom.
Because he says he's run out, and would he mind having a whip round on the boat to see if anyone's got any?
In any case, back in London, Philby's bosses politely demurred on Greene's brothel operation.
I think it was more a practical thing than anything, because it was a long way away from where Greene was, and they'd have to rely on the madame to run it, and they had to be confident that she knew what she was doing. I don't think it would be the sensitivities of MI6 that would have ended in its the decision to refuse permission to let it go ahead. I think it would be more, the practicalities of the thing.
Of course, Kim Philby was no slouch in the extramarital activities department either. It was one of the many things the two men had in common. But rest assured, real spy work was being undertaken in Freetown.
Kim Philby, who is well established now as the VD chief, if you pardon the expression, and so he's control of the Iberian Peninsula, and he's waging an intelligence war against the Abwehr.
The Abwehr, if you're unfamiliar, was Germany's military intelligence wing.
He makes a pretty significant discovery. He manages to identify a network of spies who are operating out of Portugal. And he's got two good leads.
Philby's leads had come from the German Enigma codes, which since 1940 had been regularly intercepted and decrypted by Bletchley Park.
And one of them is a guy called, a journalist called Manuel dos Santos, who is a trained German spy who is sent to Freetown on the SS Kwanza.
When he arrived in Freetown, Santos was pulled off his boat and interrogated by the local police, who were tipped off by Greene. The law in Freetown was led by a man called Patrick Brodie.
He's in his late 50s, or he's been in Sierra Leone for 20 years.
Brodie was a veteran colonial policeman and one of Graham Greene's closest friends in Freetown. When Greene had been cut off by Sidney Smith, it was Brodie who kept him ticking over financially until Philby had taken the reins.
And Santos is interviewed or interrogated by Brodie and the field security police. And it emerges quite quickly that Santos doesn't really have the heart to hold out for much longer.
Sensing a breakthrough was near, the British had Santos extradited to Camp O20, an interrogation centre in the countryside to the south of London.
He confesses to being part of a German spy network.
But Santos was just the beginning. Philby's intel identified a second Portuguese agent working for the Germans. Armando de Avila.
He's considered much more dangerous than Dos Santos because he's a very bad character, sort of spy who would sell his grandmother, never mind his wife, to the highest bidder.
This was a man MI6 needed off the table.
And they tip off Brody and Greene that this is a dangerous spy and they want to catch him at all costs.
Dangerous, maybe. But if de Avila was trying to fly under the radar, he wasn't trying very hard.
During a search of this ship, the SS Angola that docks in Freetown, they discover that de Avila is actually travelling under his real name. And they whisk him off the boat and dispatch him to London.
Soon, Camp 020 had another valued guest.
And this is run by the famous Colonel Robin Stevens, Tin-Eye. Wears a monocle, but he uses pretty robust interrogation techniques. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, he's managed to break down Dos Santos and Avila, and they establish that there are 300 names of German agents, contacts, couriers, and cutouts. It's an amazing dividend in terms of the intelligence breakthrough.
A huge Abwehr network spanning Portugal and West Africa was broken. The trio of Philby, Greene and Brody could claim a big slice of the credit. And this operation had serious ramifications for the wider war.
It's such a success that Philby's able to use it to tell his bosses, we've got a dossier here, a dossier of evidence which proves that the Germans are not only spying on us, they're spying on the Portuguese.
British diplomats contacted the neutral Portuguese Prime Minister, Antonio Salazar. While Salazar's government had been sympathetic to the Nazis at the start of the war, this was a bridge too far.
And this intelligence breakthrough is useful in curbing the activities of the German spy machine on the Iberian Peninsula.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
This episode is brought to you by Palmolive. Family time isn't just the big moments. It's weeknight dinners, sitting around the table, everyone talking all at once. So when the plates are empty and the sink is full, use Palmolive Ultra. Palmolive's most powerful formula removes up to 99.9% of grease, leaving your dishes sparkling clean. And the new convenient pump makes cleaning even easier, so you can spend less time tackling dishes and more time together. Shop now at palmolive.com.
But despite Greene's success in Freetown, there was trouble of a more pedestrian kind brewing in the city. Workplace politics.
It's obvious that Brody and Greene are a pretty good team, and they're working closely with Philby, and they've broken up a spy ring. But there's a problem. MI5 have sent officers out there to review the security and intelligence situation, and they find that despite Brody's success with these particular operations, he has been difficult to work with, obdurate, and some of his junior officers are corrupt. They take bribes, and they don't think Brody is in charge of the situation, and they want to replace Brody with someone more malleable in MI5 terms.
There's already been one attempt by MI5 to remove Brody from his post. So far, the old policeman has proven hard to shift.
And Brody is, supported by Greene. Greene, as we've discovered, has benefited from Brody's friendship and support during his sort of troubled relationship with Sidney Smith. Greene's father dies, actually, while he's away, and I think Brody's a bit of a father figure to Greene during this troubled time. So Greene has every reason to be loyal to Brody as a friend and as an experienced officer.
After the war, Greene will go on record praising Brody as a diligent and human lawman who earned his respect.
And he says, Brody helped him greatly during his tour of duty. But there's another side to this story, one that hasn't been told before, because there's a secret report that Greene writes about Brodie, and it's purely written in terms of his professional opinion of Brodie as the security officer in charge of interrogations on behalf of MI5. And what it reveals is that Greene is prepared to put his country before his loyalty to Brodie.
For all his foibles, Greene was a serious person and a serious intelligence officer.
It's a sort of 3-page report which the governor has asked him to write because he says that there's clearly an issue here with Brodie, and he wants a sort of impartial figure who will pronounce on Brodie's reliability and security status. It turns into quite a coruscating character assassination and a detailed security analysis of the failing, as he sees it, situation in Freetown. And in it, he says that many of Brodie's junior officers are not only corrupt but drunk. More worrying in terms of the security situation is that they can't seem to keep secrets. Some of these intelligence reports that Brodie is supposed to keep to himself reaches the ears of Greene through, just idle gossip.
And loose lips really do sink ships.
Greene knows there's a security problem which could potentially threaten not just security of Freetown, but the convoys which are so vital to British security. So while he begins by sympathising with Brodie, he says Brodie is a man under a lot of pressure. Not only is he working with officers who can't be trusted and are incompetent, he's also being badgered constantly by MI5, who visiting him and demanding that he tightens up security. And he says that Brodie suffers a mental breakdown during this time, where he ends up just calling the MI5 officers who've come to visit, "You dirty spies," he says, and throws them out of his office.
In fact, Brodie's relationship with his MI5 liaisons had deteriorated so much that he had become a security risk himself.
And Greene, finally says, "I can no longer vouch for him as the MI5 man here." The implication being that, something has to be done to correct the security situation.
Read this uncharitably, and you might come to the conclusion that Greene had stabbed his friend in the back. But there was so much at stake. Towards the end of 1942, the port of Freetown was about to play a starring role in one of the most audacious operations of the war.
And this is Operation Torch. This is the combined Anglo-American landings in North Africa, which, if successful, will be the beginning of the end of the Nazi war machine. This is the beginning of the end of the war. If it's successful.
The convoys and troop carriers the Allies will need to carry off Operation Torch will have to go through Sierra Leone. If Freetown isn't secure, then it could well be over before it begins.
The wolf packs will be sent out, and we will lose tens of thousands of sailors and soldiers before they even reach the beaches in Morocco and Tunisia. So it is extraordinarily sensitive time, and in that context, it's easy to see why Greene might believe that he has an overriding duty to protect Operation Torch by betraying his friend Brodie.
Operation Torch eviscerated the Axis presence in Africa. In doing so, it largely made Greene's presence in Sierra Leone redundant. In 1943, he returned to England and was promoted to the head of the Portuguese desk for MI6 counterintelligence. Now, he was working directly under Kim Philby in the same building. Their friendship deepened, but Philby's loyalty was, as ever, to the Soviet Union. So far, that hadn't been a problem.
When we're fighting the war, after the Russians come over to our side, they're our allies. So, there's a joint interest in pursuing the same thing. Russians and British want to win the war against the Germans.
But that was about to change. Already, the seeds of the Cold War to come were being sown.
As the war starts to unwind and it's clear that the Allies are going to beat the Germans, our interests are not quite so well aligned because the Russians now have one eye on a settlement.
Basically, Stalin needed to be sure that the USSR would get a slice of whatever remained of post-war Europe.
So in that context, Philby has to make sure that anything he does in the Iberian Peninsula puts the Russians' interests first. And this is particularly clear in the case of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who is the head of the Abwehr at this time.
Wilhelm Canaris, the German spy chief, had once supported Hitler, but by this point in the war, he was covertly undermining the Führer, disgusted by the lunacy of the Nazi regime. For all the shadow war between MI6 and Canaris's Abwehr, it was becoming clear that he could be somebody worth working with.
There's an idea that perhaps Canaris can help with a peace settlement between the Western Allies, that's the British and Americans, and post-Hitler Germans.
Now, this is the last thing the USSR wants to happen. If the Allies can reach a negotiated settlement with Germany, then Russia, a communist country, will not be a favoured partner in peacetime.
Their plans or ambitions of occupying swathes of Eastern Europe will be frustrated.
So Philby does all he can to thwart Canaris's attempts at an olive branch. And he's not above using Graham Greene to do it. In 1943, Canaris arrives in Portugal, hoping to make contact with the British.
And Philby tries to frustrate any attempt to bring the British and Canaris together. And he does this by getting Greene to tip off the Portuguese International Police about Canaris's whereabouts and arrival in Portugal.
Thanks to Philby and the unwitting Greene, Canaris's efforts came to nothing. A possible future, one in which Germany made a conditional surrender, was averted. The stage for the next 50 years of shadow warfare was set.
It's only after the war that Greene says, I didn't realise I was working for, in effect, the Russians, thanks to my relationship with Philby.
It's June 1944. At the Café Royal on London's Regent Street, 3 spies are taking a leisurely lunch. They are Kim Philby, Graham Greene, and Ian Milne, Philby's number 2, and, incidentally, the nephew of Winnie the Pooh author A.A. Milne. Greene fixes his keen eyes on the younger men. He has an alarming announcement to make.
And during this lunch, he explains that 4 days before D-Day, he is resigning from service.
Of all the times to quit, why now?
Everything is hinging on D-Day. We're talking about culmination of everything that they've been working for. If you're an MI6 officer, you can't imagine a more exciting time to be alive. So why would Graham Greene, an experienced intelligence officer, leave MI6 at the most important and exciting point in the Second World War?
Greene makes various excuses. In a correspondence after the war, he tells Ian Milne that he was wary of Philby's attempts to consolidate power within MI6 for him and his inner circle.
Now, that, makes a bit of sense, apart from the fact that Ian Milne, who was closely involved in all this, says there was no such intrigue at the time. Philby wasn't up to anything like that. It was much later that he manages to actually take over Section 5 at the end of the war.
Somewhat unbelievably, Greene also claims to be bored.
He says he wants to go overseas, but in the end he ends up swapping a desk job for another desk job. He works for another Whitehall department, another secret department, which is even more desk-bound than the one he's currently in.
The only person who seems to understand why Greene has resigned is Kim Philby himself.
He believes that Greene had good reason for doing so. He doesn't say exactly why he believes this, but he's about the only person, certainly in the intelligence community, who believes Greene had a good reason for doing so. And it might be that in itself helps to explain what may have been going on in the Philby-Greene relationship.
Looking back with 80 years remove, we can only hypothesize. But luckily, that's what Robert Verkaik's extensive research allows us to do.
Could it be possible then that Graham Greene became suspicious of Kim Philby's connections to the Soviet Empire? Was this the reason that he decided to leave MI6 just before D-Day? And there could be 2 reasons why he wanted to leave.
One might be that Greene didn't want to compromise his own reputation by being party to Philby's spying.
he may not have seen Philby's spying as treachery necessarily. He may not believe that Philby was betraying Britain, because what was he doing? He was passing on secrets to allies from Britain to Russia. But perhaps he didn't want to be party to that, and he'd seen through Philby and decided that he would leave before he became more involved in Philby's espionage. And could it be that Greene was prepared to leave without saying anything because he valued Philby's friendship?
Remember, it had been Philby who'd saved Greene's bacon when he'd been left high and dry by Sidney Smith in Sierra Leone. And that hadn't been the last time Kim had stepped in on Graham's behalf.
When Greene was accused by MI5 of botching the sending of an agent to the Azores and compromising operations in the Azores, it was Philby who intervened and once again stood up for Greene and protected him from MI5's wrath.
Philby had also had his back when Greene had taken it upon himself to expose lax security among the American OSS officers who were embedded with them in London. He'd taken their files from a secure cabinet and left them littered around the office. He'd made his point in typically cantankerous fashion, but he hadn't been prepared for the blowback.
They conducted an investigation and Greene became the prime suspect in their inquiry. And once again, it was Philby who intervened and stopped Greene from being subjected to disciplinary action because of this.
Robert believes that Greene had every reason to remain loyal to his friend and protector. But regardless, the cat would be out of the bag sooner rather than later. In 1951, their gig was up for diplomats Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean. An investigation by MI5 forced their defection to the Soviet Union. Both men were part of the same spy ring as Kim Philby, the ring that, in the fullness of time, would be dubbed the Cambridge Five. But in the immediate aftermath of the scandal, the hunt was on for the person who tipped them off, the third man.
Philby was left holding the baby. It was pretty obvious to lots of these people who suspected Philby in the first place that he was the third man. They could never prove it.
Nonetheless, Philby resigned his hard-won position at MI6 and began working as a journalist in Beirut.
Although he seemed to continue to retain the trust of a number of MI6 officers and may have even done some freelance intelligence work for them.
Eventually, the walls closed in on Philby too. He defected to Russia in 1963. But that was far from the end of the friendship between him and Graham Greene.
Greene ends up writing the foreword to Philby's memoir, My Silent War. The origins of how that came to be is unclear.
Greene's foreword was soft on his old boss, likening Philby's Soviet espionage to the principled plight of English Catholics under the reign of Elizabeth I. Nonetheless, the two men wouldn't actually speak again until some years later, in 1975, when Greene received a postcard out of the blue. It bore a Russian stamp.
On the postcard it says, "I am your greatest fan." When they start up a correspondence which entails Greene sending Philby the script of his next novel, The Human Factor, which is a novel about an MI5 defector who ends up in Moscow, and he wants Philby to read the script to make sure that he's got the correct characterization of Moscow.
As it happened, Philby thought Greene was being a bit hard on the place.
You've overwritten that.
Greene didn't change his manuscript, but the two men kept in touch.
And all the letters, Greene passes them on to MI6. And all this correspondence goes back and forth, and presumably Philby does the same thing. But there's a channel of communication between Greene and Philby, between MI6 and the KGB, really. And some of it is intriguing, and some of it is mundane.
But in this world, nothing is ever quite as it seems.
One level is that these are two old friends, two spies who are used to playing the game and got a lot to catch up on, you know. And for Philby, there's a lot more in it for him because he has no contact with Westerners, and Greene represents the only contact with the old world and the old days when he was an MI6 officer. But on another level, you might see it as an unofficial attempt by MI6 to get to Philby and try and make indirect contact with Philby, with perhaps a view to getting him to come back to Britain.
Certainly, neither man would have been a stranger to coded language, but whether or not these letters held more than met the eye, they kept the relationship alive.
So after decades of corresponding between the two old friends, Greene finally gets to visit Moscow. And this is in September 1986, at the sort of height of perestroika, when relations between the West and Russia have warmed up considerably, thanks to Gorbachev. And Greene gets to visit Moscow and he arranges to meet Kim Philby.
Which is where this episode began.
They met on 3 other occasions, and the last time was 1988, just before Philby died. And we never really know exactly what they spoke about. But we do know that Greene was deeply troubled by his relationship with Philby, and it troubled him right until his own death in 1991, when he had a few days to live. And one of the last requests he makes is he asks his niece to provide him with letters that his biographer has written to him about his relationship with Philby.
For all the years since his outing, Greene had outwardly tolerated Kim Philby's betrayal of his country, if indeed he saw it as a betrayal. But the idea that he might have pulled the wool over his eyes might have been harder to take. Which brings us to one of the stranger ideas in Robert's research.
He's troubled by the idea that Philby may have been not a double agent, but a treble agent. And that is, he might have been actually working for the British all along and had somehow duped Greene into another, I suppose, betrayal, really, by not telling him that he was really still working for the British and that he had tricked Greene into coming to Russia. I mean, the idea that Philby was a treble agent and that he couldn't tell Greene does seem to me a bit far-fetched. I don't necessarily believe Philby was a treble agent, but I do believe that Greene was troubled by that possibility. I mean, that is a betrayal piled upon a betrayal.
Graham Greene passed away in 1991. But one heated exchange with his biographer, Norman Sherry, sums up his feelings about Kim Philby.
You don't know the man. You can't judge him.
I'm Rhiannon Needs. For much, much more on the fascinating relationship between these two giants of the 20th century, be sure to pick up a copy of Robert Verkaik's The Writer and the Traitor. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?
Know someone in your life celebrating a birthday? They deserve to feel truly celebrated. That's what 1-800-Flowers has helped people do for 50 years, turning everyday gestures into meaningful moments of connection. And this April, during their 50th birthday celebration event, when you buy one bouquet, get a second bouquet 50% off. Celebrate more birthdays with our 50th birthday event all April long at 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify. Buy one bouquet, get a second bouquet 50% off at 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify.
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 5-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 40% off site-wide, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.